guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we will take a look at some new revenge content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
First one is titled, Short Me $70,000 in violation of our written agreement? Pay up $1.8 million. A year out of school in the early 1990s, I procured a job as a business analyst for a large, family-owned tech company. This business was located in the booming heart of technology at the time and was very profitable. As tech took off over the next decade, the company thrived and remained family-owned. What was a rich family and company became exceedingly wealthy with a valuation, net worth in the high 9, low 10 figures. The family that owned it was quite neurotic, very moody, and had a reputation as very ruthless, greedy, when it came to financing, deal-making, employees, etc. I truly believe this is what held them back from ultimately becoming a household name as a company. As I progressed in the company, I gained more and more face time with the owners. I worked on some projects directly with ownership that really paid off and gained me even greater access to their inner circle. Now, like a lot of people at the time, and particularly those who worked in tech, I was heavily invested in tech stocks. I discussed some of my investments and gains with ownership as casual conversation, though investing had nothing to do with my role in the company. That is until one day in late 1999 when the owner came to me and asked me if I would invest some of his personal money. He wanted me to take big risks to see if they would pay off using $1 million of his personal money. I was a bit hesitant, but still being in my late 20s and wanting to prove myself, I said I would. I asked for a written agreement where they acknowledged this wasn't my role in the company, was a personal matter between the owner and me, and to document my compensation for this side arrangement, 20% of all profits. Around this same time and by working in the industry, I started to notice the weakness associated with a lot of tech companies. They just weren't living up to their hype and stock price, and some seemed like they were starting to run out of money. I had no inside information, just a strong sense of which companies were struggling based on my work in the business. Based on this, since I started using both my money and the owner's money to short tech companies just after the new year in 2000. For anyone unfamiliar with shorting, it means if the value of a stock decreases, the value of the investment increases. I had a few long positions, but my overall position was very short. Since the owner wanted big risk and big reward, I used his money and obtained leverage or margin from the financial institution where I maintained both his and my trading accounts. The accounts were separate but both under my name. Again, I documented this and gained consent. Well, both my account and his suffered some moderate losses in the first 2 months of 2000 before the bubble began to burst, and both accounts, but his in particular, began to skyrocket. In June, the company began to suffer a downturn. We were still profitable, but since we provided tech services and products, we were not immune to weakness in the broader market. I had not informed the owner of my short strategy. He came to me one day and asked how his money was doing, saying he suspected it was way down like the general market. To his surprise, I informed him that while we still had some money tied up in options, puts, and shorts, but based on the positions I had closed, there was $1.35 million in cash sitting in the account that belonged to him. Again, I still had a bunch of open positions which, if memory serves, were worth about $1 million on that date, but the positions I had closed had yielded $1.35 million in cash just sitting in his account, which was in my name. The owner, either through ignorance or lack of attention, said, "Great, $1.35 million. Fantastic work in this down market. Will you please wire it to me?" I responded that I would, but would be taking my 20% of the $350,000 profit, or $70,000, before wiring him the $280,000. I also reminded him I still had open positions that had yet to pay off or close, but I didn't state the amount. He, once again, appeared not to understand or comprehend the open position statement. but instead totally focused on and became incensed about my rightful claim for $70,000. He went on and on about how times were tough, and I should be grateful for a job, particularly at my young age, and the entire $350,000 was necessary for him and the company. I knew this wasn't true based on my position within the company. Worse, this was my first time personally experiencing the greedy and corrupt nature that served as the basis for ownership's reputation. Now comes the revenge. Since, after 2 separate conversations, the owner didn't seem to grasp that the open positions would yield at least some income, and thus additional profit, I decided not to mention it again. I sent him back the entire $1.35 million and continued to manage the open positions to the best of my ability. And here's the kicker: the owner never brought it up again. He seemed to think the $1.35 million payment was the entire value of the account and never understood or remembered that open positions still existed. He never asked for records, tax documents, or any type of audit or financials. Given the fact that he was dishonest with me, I didn't feel the need to disabuse him of that notion. Ultimately, after a bit more net gain, I covered all of the shorts and exercised all of the options, puts in this case, for an additional $1.8 million. I worked for the company for 3 more years, and the owner never asked about it during my tenure, after I gave notice, or since. I know it's a bit crass and even shady as heck, but given his dishonesty with me over the $70,000, I felt justified in keeping the additional $1.8 million. I paid taxes on the gain, long-term cap gain, and went on my way with a fantastic nest egg. Nobody has asked about it since, and I have only told the story to a few people, and even then only after the statute of limitations passed. The final ironic cherry on top of this sundae is that during my remaining 3 years, I gained greater influence with ownership and position within the company because they considered me loyal for giving the $1.35 million back and not making too much of a stink about the $70,000 profit. Little did they know, I got the better of them. The company eventually folded due to family disputes, but my understanding is that ownership walked away in a very good financial position. They likely could have been a much better and greater company had they not practiced the same dishonesty that they showed me with their vendors, clients, and employees. Next one is titled, "Sure, I can accept all returns and never make a store goal." This happened over 4 years ago. I used to work for a retail company that was pretty small. They sold women's clothing. Since it was a pretty low volume location, their goals were often very low on some days, $800 to $1,200. We had very little foot traffic, and this wasn't always an easy goal. This is important later. As many people in retail know that there are many returns that are made daily, and this can impact your goal at the end of the day. Also, many people make a living of buying things online at one price and repurchasing the same items online once they go on sale. Once they purchase the new items at the lower price, the shopper will come into the physical store to return all of the items from their initial online purchase. This is allowed and is a very well-known practice. It's pretty obvious to the cashier what's happening because there are multiple online receipts and large amounts of products being returned. This also is a long process and results in hundreds of dollars being returned. I had one woman who would do this constantly, and everyone on our team knew what was going on when she came in with her huge bag of returns. Let's call her Meggy Lou. As an assistant manager, I would often attempt to salvage the return by suggesting new items for exchange so our store wouldn't take the hit of this large return. I guess this was very annoying to Meggy Lou, and she would get physically annoyed every time I asked or suggested we could exchange her product for another size or find her a new outfit. So much so that Meggy Lou ended up complaining to my boss about me. After this complaint, my boss scolded me and told me to just accept all returns since it doesn't come out of my paycheck, and all I needed to do was add all of the customer's info to the system, so the company has a record of the return, the company will handle it from there. On to the malicious compliance. One day I'm the only assistant manager working, and my manager is bombarding me with messages all day asking for an update on where we are at in our goal. An hour before the store closes, we hit our goal and my manager is extremely excited. On comes in Meggy Lou with her bag of returns. She came in super smug knowing I was just going to do her return and let her go. I didn't fight it at all. I did it with a smile on my face because my boss told me to just do it since it doesn't come out of my paycheck. Our goal that day was around $1,000, so we made just by the skin of our tails. Meggy Lou's return was a little over $1,200. Due to Meggy Lou's return, our store ended up in the negative for the day. Not my problem, not my paycheck. The next day, my boss wrote a long email to our district manager letting her know what happened and explaining why we shouldn't be allowed to make those returns at our store or that online returns should only be done online. She even showed it to me as though she was doing me a favor or having my back. We still had to do returns and that women kept coming back to our store and ruining our goal every day she came in. Last one is titled, "Refuse to enforce the mask policy in your restaurant? The state will find out." We have a statewide mask mandate. It is illegal for us to serve people without masks, and the only time it's acceptable is when they're seated at a socially distanced table and eating. It's been this way for over a year now. Despite these clear rules, specified by our security at the front and by signs on the doors, we still get at least a few people a day coming in without masks. If they do this, we are instructed to tell them to wear one. If they don't have one, we have some in the back and are supposed to offer it to them. If they still refuse the mask, or pull some medical exemption bullcrap, we are legally required to tell them to put on a face shield or leave our property as we will not be serving them without one. Our store manager, however, told us that our district manager, DM, only wants us to take their order quickly, have it packaged to go, and get them out of the store, rather than refuse service. I went along with this for maybe a week, until we had 2 guys come in without masks. I told them to please wear one and they said, "Oh, your coworker is getting us some." I said all right and finished up their order. By the time my coworker came back and said we don't have any more masks to give, I was already done and handing them their receipt. I said, "I'm sorry, but we don't have any more masks, so I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside. I know your number, I'll bring it out to you." The guy replies, "You know, it's illegal for you to tell us to leave for not wearing a mask." I just kind of laughed because that's ridiculous, and said, "No it's not." He goes, "Yeah, it is," angrily, and I reply, "No it's not. We're a private business, we can refuse service to anyone for any reason." He gets mad, he asks to talk to my manager, I grab him, and they talk for a few minutes while I do other things. After, he asks me to talk to him in his office. He tells me the company policy. I tell him I'm not comfortable with potentially infectious people not only standing near me without a mask in a pandemic, but standing near other customers, and refer back to our signs and state law as to why. He says he understands, but that we're a customer is always right business and this is an extension of that. I fought back my logic and anger and prioritized securing money for bills and agreed. I specifically told him I'm not going to apologize for enforcing state law where I can in a pandemic, and he said he understands, and I went back to work. Skip forward a few weeks. I'm begrudgingly following policy for less egregious offenders, mask under the nose, but still calling out those without masks, as most of my coworkers are doing and agree with as well. It's a weird middle ground of enforcement that only happens half the time, and if the customer is difficult, most of my coworkers just give up and move on. One day our DM, boss's boss, shows up to train an employee on being a shift manager. The whole store acts differently when he's here. It's now less about what works when working and more about follow exact policy when he's watching, which is all the time. I'm on orders and in walk 2 guys, yet again, without masks. DM is standing behind me watching others when I ask both of them to wear a mask. I can hear him behind me stop and watch my interaction. They just outright refuse and start reciting their order. I don't put anything in and tell them again to please put on a mask. The DM literally pushes me aside, enters the food, runs the order, and hands them the receipt. He gives me a look like I'm in trouble, I give him a look like he's crazy, and we don't address it for another hour or two. Getting in trouble with the DM is pretty much asking to get fired, but this was a hill I was willing to die on. In walks a state auditor, dressed as a regular customer. Prior to my restaurant job, I worked in legal compliance for 4 years and dealt with state auditors almost daily, even doing their job for a few months. I know what they look like and how they behave, and even swore I'd seen this guy once or twice before. He comes in, orders simple, and goes to sit down near the counter where he can hear, and pulls out his tablet to take notes. He's paying very close attention to everything in the back as opposed to texting and not hearing his number get called the first 3 times like a normal customer, so I'm convinced he's an auditor. As the universe aligns, in walks a family with sporadic masks. Dad and his son have one. The mom and other son do not. DM is in the back watching the grill, so I take my moment and loudly ask them to please wear a mask. Mom says she and her son are medically exempt. I say alright, then you need to wear a face shield. She says that's not part of the rules. I say yes, it is. We have a sign you walked past indicating as such. I smiled massively behind my mask when she asked for the manager to speak to and made sure to go get the DM. He walks up, talks to them briefly, goes through with their order, and sends them on their way. He turns and calls my name clearly, in view of all coworkers and the auditor who was very clearly paying attention, and tells me to speak with him in the office. He chews me out in the back about not following company policy, and they switch my shift from orders to clean up in the dining area. I go out to clean and see the maskless family waiting for their food uncomfortably close to the auditor, who's now squished in his booth trying to keep distance, rapidly taking notes. Maybe 10 minutes later the auditor gets his food and asks me a question before he leaves. Were you reprimanded by your boss for asking them to wear masks? He asks. Yes. He blinked in surprise. Who reprimanded you? I smiled again, the district manager. He nodded, thanked me for the service and food, and left. A few days later we had a letter, addressed by the state to our DM and our store, in particular, displayed on the board for all to see about the importance of enforcing mask policy in a pandemic, and that if further infractions are incurred and policy is not enforced, we will be forcibly shut down. My store manager never brought it up again when I and others asked customers to put on a freaking mask. I've seen the DM once since. He gave me an angry look and hasn't said a word to me. Thanks for listening.